Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And here we are in the Cash American Knowledge Team meeting. And I thank all the panelists for being here today as we're broadcasting around the world on all the 6 continents and maybe 7. But we are trying to bring this knowledge in such a way that people around the world can grasp it. And but we've been doing this for over 10 years. And so the question then becomes is how fast can we get the newcomers onto that stream? And this is very important because we just finished the SINO conference in China, and it was truly a watershed moment. And so on that note, this is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. We are progressing through the advanced transmission stage. The subject today is confirmation. My name is Alexander. I'm from Canada. It is March 31st of 2024. So as we continue these public classes, it's to not only try and amalgamate all the hours of teaching into a more condensed form, but also to make it possible for newcomers to grab onto the knowledge without getting swamped and overwhelmed, although the knowledge is overwhelming. And so many of us are now in the position where we can act as the guides and teachers for the future. And as you can see, we are completing this advanced transmission section, and we only have one more to go next week. And today we're discussing confirmation because it's something that we all gravitate to. And the reason we do that is because we have this hesitancy, and we call it the donkey hesitancy because it's the lowest energy state. And so although it's akin to walking, we find that rolling is faster than walking. But, you know, we say life is hard until you get up on the horse. And the reason for that is because the horse walking is faster than the man walking. And the question always is there a point of confirmation? And so as we proceed point by point, step by step, or step by cycle, how many steps and how many cycles? Well, we have to exercise caution because things could get sticky or slippery. Yeah, so one or the other. Then we're trying to sort this out, and we do this through the books of Miriam Tavakoli Keshe, as in book number 1, The Universal Order of Creation of Matter. And it's brought together 2 concepts, the universal order of creation and the universal order of matter. And we try and understand that better because somehow there is a structure. And so in book number 2, we referred to this as the structure of the light. But, light goes from one point to another point. And so there's a structure of the point, then there's a structure of the light, and somehow the two work together because in book number 3, we see the origin of the universe, where we have the one point and it splits up into 2 points, and one of which is our tiny little perfect universe. We call it man's universe. And then we have a sister universe as somewhere in that nebulous point in outer space. And so we're trying to achieve that and going through another training session, which is the transmutation preparation training sessions, which is a set of 6 classes running concurrently for 6 months, basically on every 3rd Friday of the month. And the 4th session is coming up this April. And you can all register for this and enjoy the training session. And like school, you don't have to go class by class or year by year. You can skip classes, and some people can complete the sessions very quickly, and other people will still take years. And so it's an individual thing. And this is very good because we are all individuals and we create this variety on this planet. But as we've seen in 319 One Planet, One Nation, One Race for Justice and World Peace seminars that we hold every Tuesday, we are all one big family. We are all part of the humanity family. But not only that, we're also part of the universal family. And we're trying to figure out our position within that family, not as a matter of hierarchy, as a matter of complementarity. So the thing that is always elusive is achieving this kind of confirmation. So we constantly refer to the structure of light because that helps us to search for the confirmation of outer space, so that we can get to that reactance point on the plasma highway surface, to that pie in the sky and beyond. Yeah, and beyond. So the thing is the plasma highway obviously doesn't have a speed limit, and that's not the highway we're on. We're on the transmission highway. We are on the slow highway, the very, very slow highway. And just to show you the range that we're operating in, music is an important component in our life. And if you've ever played a keyboard, you understand that you can change the frequency by octaves. And by going 1 octave higher, you double the frequency. And you can start at the bottom of the keyboard and go to the top of the keyboard. And we generally consider that as the audible range. But we know that we can go beyond that. What we don't know is how far we can go beyond that. And the thing is we can only do this in stages and double up. But we find that we have also a visible range. And as such, there's a relationship between the wavelength of light and the frequency of light. And that relationship is always constant. So the speed of light is always constant. But the color of the light changes. And interestingly enough, in the range that we see as visible, we have these beautiful colors, but obviously there's a beyond. And where is this beyond? And then we see that there's an environmental range. And this has to do with nature's bountiful solvent. We call it water. And so we measure the acidity and alkalinity of the water on a pH scale that goes from 1 to 14. And so that becomes our environmental range. So 1 being acidic, being very unstable, very simple, and 14 being very alkaline, very stable, very complex. but, you know, we know that there's a 15 and a 16 because we're all good at math. So, you know, we're just looking at this environment range. And so when we look at the rest of the universe and we see the universe embodiment range, and we can see, well, wait a second, here's our little tiny perfect world, but you know, we say the speed of light is the fastest transmission. And so that kind of limits the range of what we see. And so we have to question if this is true, because our tiny little perfect world is so little tiny, and yet the rest of the universe is so massive. It is so large. So, you know, if the speed of light is the fastest transmission, and, you know, we're still in the donkey hesitancy speed, then in order to go at the speed of light, you have to be as well, you have to be as big as the universe. And you wonder if that is true. And then, of course, if you're as big as the universe, well, the universe, from what we see, is the tangible confirmation. But what's beyond the tangible confirmation? Hmm. So this is how we're delving into the creation of the universe. So we see that the universe exists from energy, and energy is a charge in motion. So that means that the energy has a positive or negative charge, and that reflects its motion, not the energy itself, because energy is always positive. But since it's always in motion, and we have to remember that, ironically, we have to remember that. When we look at the cover of book number 1, we see the coming together of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. So we find that things work in combination. And what things are working in combination? So the answer really is that all things work in combination. And if all things work in combination, then that involves the universal embodiment. And so seeing as we see the universe, that's our immediate confirmation of that truth. But when we create another confirmation, such as the cups of life, and remember, they were not the cups of the pandemic, but they represented the emotional strength of our inner space. And from it, we brought from some nebulous point, you know, well, we don't know where that came from, but it came to the core space in the cup of life. And we were able to create an emotional field and a physical field. And from that, we were able to create many other things. Most notably, of course, is that we were able to create a GANS, which is gas as a nanosolid. This is a manifestation of the radiance of the energy of the universe. But none of these components were in the components that we made to make the cups of life, except we did start with water. Yes, we did start with water. We started with some metals, and we started with a few other things, but we created a copper GANS and a zinc GANS and a carbon GANS and calcium GANS, amino acid GANS, and well, we even created a water GANS. So that was really hard to tell because we were creating more water in the cup. And it's hard to tell when you have more because everything is in motion. So to understand the terminology and through the introductions that we had several years ago, we have to understand there's a difference between transmission, which is what we're talking about, advanced transmission, transition, and transmutation. So we see that the transmission involves x-axis rotation, transition involves the y-axis polarity, and the transmutation involves the z-axis. And different from carpentry, it involves field strength. And yet now we're discussing terminology, and we find, well, the transmission terminology, we find that, wait a second, you can't operate in one dimension. You have to have the 3 dimensions of transmission, because this is what gives you the rotation, the polarity, and the field strength. And it is through the confirmation of these 3 dimensions that allows you to do transmission. And so what is the transmission? And the transmission is not the message. The transmission dimension is the medium. That's how we transmit the message. I see. So when we see what we have from the Earth, and we see that the Earth rotates on its x-axis and around the y-axis poles, and of course it's a big fat Earth and kind of flat on top, but it's spherical and it keeps rotating, and so that becomes the field we call the z-axis. And this all came about because two forces originally came together on this x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension and created this coming together. And so then we achieve this conformation. And so that becomes our energy binding system. And it's very important because if you don't have the energy binding, well, you then technically are not going to exist. But you do exist. The question really has to be extended. What kind of dimension do you exist? So the self-serving is very important so that it facilitates this energy binding. But if your neighbor is likewise dependent on that energy binding and self-serving energy and is deriving it from the same source that you are, then it behooves you to receive that energy from the original source. But many of us have abdicated that. We are doing it at the expense of others. So what is the result? The result, we achieve our energy binding, the purpose of which is self-serving, but we rob others of their energy binding and thereby undermining their self-serving determination. And so how do we compensate for that? So then the neighbor has to rob someone else. And then, of course, then that involves lying and cheating. And then, of course, extremes where you get into the killing. And then, of course, the ultimate extreme, the killing of oneself, what we call suicide. So this is totally opposite to what we're trying to achieve with respect to field capture. So we find that the x-axis transmission is parallel to the ground because we're looking at from our point of reference, right? So our y-axis transmission is perpendicular to the ground, and the z-axis transmission, well, we're not sure where that ground is because what we're trying to bring together is these three dimensions: the x-axis dimension, the y-axis dimension, and the z-axis dimension. But since this is all a confirmation of the energy coming together, it's moving. And what is the difference in its position? And so we've been discussing that. And so we've determined that there's a principal interaction. So you have to have this interaction, this energy binding, self-serving to maintain your condition. And that condition needs to be supplemented continually by energy. And so that energy is continually in motion. But, if you're interacting with others, and we're not saying what others, but any others, so that energy is a two-way street because there's a giving and there's a taking. And so this is very fundamental. So when we're talking about this two-way transmission, we have at least two dimensions. It's a two-way street, but there are two directions, two sizes, two variables, and you could have multiple lanes. And so this gives you a lot of variety. And we started out in such basic, simple terms as the y-axis dimension and the x-axis dimension. And the only one that we're paying attention to is the x-axis dimension because, you know what, we want to get from here to there. And, we don't want to bother with the rest of the stuff. But the rest of the stuff has to be there in order to facilitate our energy binding. And also, it has to respect this energy in motion, which is basically either a negative or a positive charge. And so we identify the negative is giving and the positive is taking. But this energy which energy is it? And is it a giving energy or is it a taking energy? And is that the one and the same energy, or does it really matter? Because energy, generically speaking, can be flowing or binding. So in that case, then we have to see that there's no such thing as one and the same energy, which constitutes a charge at two adjacent increments of time. So when we say energy, it's a generic energy. It's like saying car. Well, does that put a solid picture in your mind? Does that give you a confirmation? And, one person may have a car with uh, that's blue, and another one have a car that's red. And another one may have a car with four doors, and another one with is a convertible. So, you know, being generic is non-specific. And so how do we get specific? And how do we achieve this confirmation? And so this becomes the understanding, because it's the embodiment of the principles of flow and connection. So if we can understand that, and we're having even trouble understanding how we're just moving along in these dimensions, this basic X, Y, and Z axis transmission dimension, and it's only operating perpendicular to the ground. But then we find that if we put a little spin on that, then we can change the way it flows. But it also contributes to the difference in position. So the difference in position doesn't necessarily cause deterioration, or it doesn't cause a supplementation. And I say necessarily because there's always a question of consumption. So, it's like the oil in the crankcase of a internal combustion vehicle. You have to have the right amount of oil. And if you have an oil leak, well, then you have to supplement. But then if you put too much oil in, you could damage the motor. So it has to be just right, Goldilocks. Yes. So this is where the star formation comes in, because what you've done is you've set up the condition. And so this is going back, uh, well, 10 years basically, to the creation of the star formation. So in this picture, we see physical rotating spheres aligned in a star formation, where we have three on the uh, x-axis plane at the bottom, and we have the one at the top on the y-axis. And then all of a sudden, this z-axis field starts to manifest due to the rotation and the positioning of the spheres, the rotating spheres, and their nearness and proximity. And so we find that there's a kind of what we call a magnetical gravitational relationship. And so the foundation, we call it gravitational, and the transmission, we call it magnetical. And we see this because we're finding that the gravitational energy is stronger than the magnetical energy. Except there's a problem. And the problem is the small m matter state is weaker than the capital M matter state, which is actually plasmatic. So if the stronger feeds the weaker, then the plasma state becomes gravitational. But the plasma state, and likewise the dynamic plasma state, is a plasma state and it's not physical. So we have a bit of an anomaly here. So Dino Kraspedon, the brilliant Brazilian mathematician is mathematical, yes. So he figured out that there's a magnetical residue, and we call it God because it's a set of mutually perpendicular lines of force oscillating upon themselves. And so the question then becomes is how do we go from one point to another? And how do we choose? So there is such a thing as a natural selection, and so there's also a precedence, and that has to do with nearness and proximity. So in this case, if we say, well, the x-axis is first, let's say, and so it chooses a route to go from one point to the other point, and the route goes from point to point. And so the perceived transmission is from the first point to the last point. But in fact, to get there, it has to navigate past two other points. And the reason it has to do that is because that only facilitates one dimension. So to facilitate the y-axis, now it has an option and it can go in another direction. And it goes from point to point, and its objective is to get to the same destination. But it goes by a different route. And now that the x-axis and the y-axis has selected its route, it kind of makes it easier for the z-axis to follow another route because it too wants to start at that same point and come together at the other point. And so thereby completing the third dimension. And so what you find is a confirmation of different patterns. And yet they all start from the same point and they come to the end at the same point, but they traveled a different route. And this is where the spice of life comes in. So we are all unique, but we are all part of the humanity race, and we all came from somewhere. So we came from a point, and we all came through our own route, and we came to the same point, Earth space. Hello, we're here. We were born here. And because we all came from a different route, came via a different route, excuse me, then, but we came from the same root, if you will. So ROOT as in plant root. That's our root, our origin, but we came by a different route, or some people say route. The point is, point by point, that we all have unique points of travel. And so we all came here. And so this is where we have the same family, but unique variety. So this becomes very important when we want to understand our planet, because there's 8 billion of us. But you know, there's a lot of things we don't know about our planet, and we've almost come to the point where we know more about other planets than we do about our own planet, for various reasons. But you know, here in 1981, we finally got to see the North Pole of Saturn. And since Saturn is a gaseous planet, and since it rotates, it's kind of strange that it has a hexagonal format at the pole. Whereas the rest of the layers of the gases, and you see different layers, not only do you see different layers that are all flowing together in a laminar fashion, so this becomes your laminar surface flow, but there are rings. And those rings have a laminar flow as well. And what's interesting, of course, because we're talking about containment, is that this planet, as a gas, is contained within the planet. And the rings that go around the planet are contained within the ring structure. So we understand that poles flip. And of course, the reason they flip is because they facilitate energy in motion, because there's charges giving and taking. Well, where are these charge points? And they are on the star form points. So we have 7 points here. We have the point right in the center, and looks kind of hollow there. And then we have the other 6 points of the hexagon. And so all we have to understand is those points are also confirmation points. And so they are points of energy exchange. Just like Dino Kraspedon lined out. And so when we look at the points and how they travel along the edges of the cube, if we were just to reposition that cube slightly, you can see that it is in a hexagonal format. And so each of the points on the hexagon is a reaction point, just like each of the points on the cube, because the cube and the hexagon are basically the same thing, just from a slightly different point of view. And so what is happening there? Well, just like we have these rotating fields in a star formation and how we've set up our cups of life, the same thing is happening. So on each point, we get something different. And so when we look at the structure of amino acid, which is also in this point, we see that we get carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and at the top we get hydrogen. But we also get other things in the center. So we started with these reactors, but as we said, we got a whole variety of gases. We got water, we got amino acid, a lot of things, and there was a lot of energy in motion. And so when we look at the point source and we take a plasma scan to see that energy in motion, and if we could see that energy in motion because it's not visible, but let's do what NASA does and colorize the picture, and we could see that not only are these converging and diverging, but they're well organized. And not only are they creating a structure in the center, but they're creating a structure around the center. So this is why when we look at the periodic table of elements, what we're seeing is the Earth space range. So the Earth spaces are environment, and so that has a range with respect to the pH scale, but the Earth space range has a range with respect to the periodic table of elements. So we find that all of these elements, and we talked about the amino acids, they're part of the periodic table, but then we have these other things like copper, zinc, and iron, and of course these mediums like sodium, magnesium, potassium, and calcium. And then we have these other things like silicon and sulfur, and then there's this very unusual group here, and we call them non-reactive gases. They're inert gases. But since energy is always in motion, obviously they're not inert. They are in balance. So they kind of become that midpoint between one side and the other. And so you need this one side and the other, because when you're looking at the surface reactants, like we talked about last week, we see that the coming together of two Magrav conditions have a magnetical interaction and then become a byproduct. And so here we see the hydrogen spectrum, which is the beginning of the elements on the periodic table of elements. So we see this magnetical manifestation based on this surface reactance. But that surface reactance has an undersurface, this gravitational conformation. In other words, the coming together of these two plasma fields create this gravitational conformation, and until it interacts with an environment, it's hard for us to tell what it is, which means that we have to create another gravitational field. And so this is how we manifested the hydrogen spectrum. And this is how we continue with this to manifest the materialization spectrum of each and every element of the periodic table of elements. And when we see that spectrum, that fingerprint, which is a unique fingerprint, then we get this gravitational confirmation of whatever we've created within the range, within our environment. So that takes care of your basic visible universal embodiment. So let's just leave the beyond at this point in time. So we see the two fundamental things of the bringing together of the hydrogen, and then of course the bringing together of the oxygen, and that becomes an energy parceling unit, and it's unique in that the structure has two hydrogens and one oxygen. And the hydrogen is magnetical and the oxygen is gravitational, but they come in balance together and forms a maggrav condition. And so we find that the water itself in its liquid state is, well, it's transparent, and it's round. In fact, it's perfectly round. And because water is a universal solvent, we can shear off one of the hydrogens, and that becomes your energy in motion. It's an energy pack. It's positive. It's gone. Once you've lost a positive, that leaves you as a negative. And so we're left with one hydrogen and one oxygen, and we call that a hydroxyl. And that becomes highly reactive. And it becomes highly reactive at the surface. So if we were to look at a diagram of water, and we say, well, it's H2O, which means the mass of the hydrogen is 1 and the mass of the oxygen is 8, which is like, you could say 8 hydrogen, but not really. There are other differences, but there are 8 times more hydrogen in oxygen than there are in hydrogen. So if you tally up the 2 hydrogens plus the 1 oxygen, you come into a mass of 10, which is an order of magnitude, which kind of corresponds with the pH table. And if you lose one of the hydrogens, well, now you've got hydrogen 1 plus oxygen 8. Now you only have 9. So that doesn't allow you to change the pH. That keeps you within that range, wanting to create another balanced maggrav. However, we do change pH. And so we find in a slightly alkaline state that we can produce essential amino acids like alpha-linolenic acid. And what makes it so interesting is, of course, that, well, we now bring in more hydrogens and we bring in more oxygen. And these are facilitated at the bend points. So when we create this bend, it creates a convergence of oxygen. So really, inside this amino acid, which is oil, we create 3 links, and each one is oxygen and hydrogen. And since they always come in pairs, so we actually create 3 H2Os. So we can clearly see that in the creation of essential fatty acids, which are oils, we create water. So this becomes the product of creation. And so why is that important? Because when you create, like we discussed in some of the earlier classes in the basic teaching, and how we made the nanocoating, because of the multiple layers, we created these nanostars. The thing about these nanostars, of course, is that you don't necessarily decide which is the gravitational side and which is the magnetical side. But if you link them up, then the opposite poles have to attract. And when you start to get them in a chain, then they link in a chain. And if you have more than 3 in this chain, then it becomes a polymer. And a polymer is basically a material that is created synthetically, and it just grows in a linear fashion. And then it just creates a structure by applying more and more of itself. But if you're creating a protein, more than 3, which is 4 in a chain, they fold over into protein. So the amino acid no longer is amino acid, it's now protein. And so this is how you get the 4 amino acids together. And of course, they obey the magnetical gravitational relationship of this protein state. And so, as we said, with this protein state, we create water. And so, because of this ability to create protein and to create water, we can create a phospholytic containment system using phospholipids. And so there's a point that's inside the cell, a point that's outside the cell. And so there has to be a communication in there. And then there's also a communication from cell to cell. So somehow things have to go from inside to the outside of your self-containment and go to the inside or outside of another field's self-containment. And so that's how the energy moves. And if oil and water mixed, then our cells would not be able to contain themselves, and we would just be bags of mush. And then we just kind of slide on the floor, I guess. But, in physics, we talked about this meniscus last week, which is the curvature in the upper surface of a liquid close to the surface of a container or another object. And this is produced by surface tension. But interestingly enough, when the water is in a container, the meniscus goes up. But when you find something that's very, very dense, like mercury, the meniscus goes down. So there's clearly a difference in this surface tension based on the density of the material that you're looking at. And the relationship of both of these materials in this particular example, they are in glass test tubes, let's say. And then, of course, above the containment is air. And that air is contained above the water, and the air is contained above the mercury. But that's the relationship from the water side. What if we looked at the relationship from the air side? So in other words, let's flip this whole thing around. And we'll say from the air's point of view, the air is convex. And the air, with respect to mercury, is concave. Well, okay, just a moment here. The mercury is more dense than the water, so thereby the mercury is convex. Okay. But the air is not more dense than the water. So in that case, how could the air be convex. So the only way that you can have this exchange at the surface, because there's not only an exchange between the water and the glass, but there's an exchange of energy between the water and the air. So there has to be some pole flipping going on, because some of the water is exchanging with the air and some of the water is exchanging with the glass. And likewise, some of the mercury is exchanging with the air and some of the mercury is exchanging with the glass. So there's definitely a gravitational magnetical relationship, and it is constantly in motion. So therefore, the poles are flipping. Now, when we're talking about pH, we need to understand a product like anhydrous ammonia, which is a gas form of ammonia that contains no water. Okay. So now we're taking water out of the equation. And the formula is NH3, and it's widely used as a source of nitrogen fertilizer. Okay, so we're missing oxygen here. But, you know, it has still 4 points, except that this time the nitrogen is nitrogen 7, and the hydrogen is 1 plus 1 plus 1. And 7 and 3, that's 10. Isn't that interesting? And it happens to be extremely alkaline. And it's easy to apply, right? But, you know, if it's not handled properly, it can be dangerous. So we understand that anhydrous means without water, right? And so anhydrous ammonia contains 82% nitrogen, the highest amount of any nitrogen fertilizer. So, but in some respects, it behaves like water, since you can have it in solid, liquid, and gaseous form. Okay. So then there's another product called montmorillonite. And this is a natural clay mineral. And it has these conformities. It's called a phyllosilicate. And it actually comes in 2 tetrahedral sheets and 1 octahedral sheet. 3 dimensions. Isn't that interesting? And unlike other clay nanoparticles, the montmorillonite presents an inner layer space between each triple sheet layer. Kind of like phospholipids. So montmorillonite itself is a very soft phyllosilicate group of minerals that form when they precipitate. They precipitate from a water solution as microscopic crystals. So that's known as clay. And so if we look at the formula of montmorillonite, we see that, well, there's sodium, there's calcium, aluminum, magnesium, silicon, oxygen, there's hydroxyls, there's even water molecules. So it all depends on, you know, if it's wet or if it's dry. And so it's called a colloidal hydrated aluminum silicate. And it swells 12 times its dry size when added to water. Well, 12 times is more than an order of magnitude. 10 times is an order of magnitude. So when it's dry, it really shrinks. And it's hydrophobic. But when you add water to it, it swells up. And at that point, it acts totally differently. But it has a higher alkalinity on the pH scale. And when you look at fish husbandry, and especially in the Orient, where they treasure the brilliant colors of goldfish and koi, you find that the colors are really, really brilliant. And when you compare those colors to, say, those kinds of fish that are bred in Florida, they're not as brilliantly colored. And the reason is very simple. They use a lot of montmorillonite in the Japanese ponds. And the reason for that is because it enhances the brilliance of the color, the radiance of the color, the brilliance, the shine. And it also affects the fish health. And there's another fish that is also rewarded with brilliant colors that comes in the rift lakes in Africa, particularly Lake Tanganyika and Lake Malawi. And they're extremely deep and extremely alkaline. We're talking about a pH of 8.5. So when you look at the Amazon, and they have cichlids there as well, but they're not as brilliantly colored as they are in Africa. And that's because the pH of the water is between 6.5 and 7.5. But this becomes very important because when the pH of the water is 7.5, the fish can lay eggs. And when it goes down to 6.5, the eggs hatch. And the reason for it is because the shell of the egg is calcium based. And of course, it needs to be harder in order to facilitate containment of the egg. Okay, so even the fish know by, shall we say, responding to the pH of the water, they know when to lay the eggs, and then they know when to nurture their offspring. So when we're talking about this meniscus and this attraction, this energy that is facilitated through this alkalinity or its acidity, we find that the meniscus of the curved liquid surface results in a kind of interplay of adhesion. So the liquid's attraction is attracted to its container, or it's attracted to itself. So that adhesion drives capillary action, which draws the liquid up a narrow tube. And so we can actually take a tube between containers, and that container could be a cup, it could be a pond, and they could all be at the same height. So by filling the tubes up with the water, even though the tubes are above the surface of the water, due to the connection and the capillary action, you could create this daisy chain effect where the water coming into one container will eventually come out on the other container. And the result is that you have a stable flow in each and every container. So you have only one in and one out, but you have 6 containers that are interconnected. So we understand siphoning, right? You know, if you've ever siphoned gas out from a car, or you find that the principle with a siphon hose is to flow from one containment to another. There's a plant. It's ideal for this purpose. It's called Java moss. And as you can see, it has an extremely high surface to volume ratio, extremely high. Very hairy, and each of the hairs has a lot of hairs. So extremely high surface to volume. And when they are moist, they create a capillary bridge. And so you can, in fact, using Java moss instead of a siphon hose, flow from one containment to another. And it's actually really beautiful because with the flow of the water that comes in once, flows through 6 containers and goes out, it has to go through this Java moss bridge. And as the water flows, it's giving and taking energy. And so the Java moss itself grows. And as the Java moss grows, it becomes a more stable bridge. And in fact, as it grows, then it can actually increase the flow from one containment to another. And so you find that the water quality becomes extremely good. So this is the way nature allows flow from one containment to the other. So the Java moss, in fact, becomes a siphon. So this is, you have the clay containers, which are hydrophobic, so you don't lose any moisture. You have the Java moss containment bridge to allow the flow. And the energy is moving, even though everything is very, very stable. So when we have the change of the seasons, funny thing happens. We have a snow containment, like you can make a snowman. And so Mr. Snowman can stay together, but there's no container. He just stays together, right? Because it's cold. And so we have the snow, and somehow, because of the density of the snow, it's able to create a snowball. And you put a bunch of snowballs together and you get Mr. Snowman. But when the temperature rises, Mr. Snowman becomes Mr. Puddles. And so you need another kind of containment for that. So it'd be kind of handy to have a clay-lined pond so you can contain Mr. Puddles and maybe you can get some fish in there. So we've said that oil and water do not mix. But if we introduce another concept, what we call emulsification, which is the process of mixing two immiscible phases, such as oil and water, with the aid of a surface active agent. That's what we talked about last week. It's called an emulsifier, and it actually emulsifies into a homogeneous dispersion or an emulsion. That's using a surfactant. But what happens if we use water? Well, we've already said that oil and water don't mix. So if you look at the picture on the left, you see that the oil in combination with water at a pH of 7 forms a very, very distinctive layer above the glass. So the water is at the bottom and the oil is on top. Well, we understand that because the amino acids from our cups of life are on top, right? So there's definitely a boundary of that. Now, if you've ever taken the amino acid from a cup of life and added it to water, and I'm sure all of us have done that, but if you look very, very closely, you will find that that amino acid will actually emulsify in the water. It will not sit on top of the other water container. And so this becomes the connection. The amino acid that you make in the cup of life, as you transfer it to another container of water, becomes the connection to that cup of water. Well, how does this relate to emulsification? Well, if you change the pH of the water and make it extremely alkaline, so going back up to a pH of 11.5, you don't need a surfactant. Just by changing the pH of the water into high alkalinity, strong alkalinity, oil and water mix. So this is above the normal drinking water range. The normal drinking water range is at 6.5 to 8.5 pH. But the plasma water, if anyone's measured the pH of the plasma water that you've created, it usually comes in around 7.5 to 8, which interestingly enough is slightly alkaline, kind of like your essential fatty acids. How cool is that? But if you go into the extreme alkaline state, well, all of a sudden, this containment of oil and water as you would see in your phospholipids, suddenly there's no containment. You have an emulsion of both oil and water, and you did that naturally. So we talked about surfactants. So this is a substance such as a detergent, for instance, that is when it's added to a liquid, reduces its surface tension, thereby increasing its spreading and wetting properties. Well, wait a second. If you were to add a surfactant to the Java moss water bridge, you would lose that surface tension and the water will not have a siphon effect. Now, where do you see these surfactants in your life? And they say, well, it's in detergents. Yeah. There's a difference between powder detergent and liquid detergent. And so the liquid detergent is made with surfactants. And so what this is good, as you all know, that if you want to, say, pick up a little particle off the floor, you would take your finger and lick it, put a little water on it, and stick your finger to that particle, and you can lift it up off the floor. And yet, when you go into a commercial building and there's the cleaner cleaning the floor, you've got all these yellow signs all over the place, slippery when wet. Well, how can the water be sticky and be slippery at the same time? So a lot has to do with the pH, because that determines the difference between the hydrophilic heads and the hydrophobic tails. And it also affects the spreading and wetting properties of the water. So we can do that naturally with the pH, or we can do it with chemical substances. And so imagine, if you will, all the laundromats that are working out there, flushing these detergents with these surfactants down the drain and into our waterways. And what is that doing to the flow of life on this planet? Well, there's another interesting thing used for flocculants, for surfactants, I'm sorry, is in the manufacture of flocculants. Flocculants are a substance that promotes the agglomeration of fine particles present in a solution, fine particles, and it creates a flock, which then floats on the surface. Or it settles to the bottom. That's called sedimentation. And so this allows it to be more easily removed from the liquid. So here's a picture of a bottle of Gans. And that Gans is in a bottle of water. And so if we talk about sedimentation, that is a settlement of the solid towards the bottom. And so Gans does that. But Gans is a gas as a nanosolid. Is it a flocculant? Is it a natural flocculant? By this definition, it seems to be, because we're using it to purify the water. We decant the water from the top of this Gans bottle, and that's our drinking water. Isn't that interesting? So this business of this hexagon and its stability is really a mirage. So not only is there a wobble, but there's a flipping of charge. And there is a structure, a hexagonal structure, but it's not always whole. In other words, if you were to remove one of the sides, although you still remain with the structure, and then take that and flip it, so now you've changed the position by flipping. It's like turning the key in a lock. And what does that mean? Well, something that is near or in proximity will change its nearness and proximity by the position of flipping. So this becomes very important if we're going to understand amino acids. And then we see that there's a relationship between 4 basic amino acids where we have no sugar with the thymine and the cytosine, and we have sugar with the adenine and guanine. And the sugar is pentagonal. And of course, it's asymmetric. And so this is good when you see it flipping. But, if you look at the hexagon, you say it's symmetrical. But wait, look at the adenine. It has a nitrogen with 2 hydrogens on one side and a hydrogen on the other side. Aren't these the components of anhydrous ammonia? And if you were to flip this hexagonal thing, even though it was symmetric, it would clearly affect the nearness and proximity of that amino acid with others. And so if you have energy in motion, then you have to understand that all of these hexagonal structures are constantly flipping, and the pentagonal structures are also flipping. But when you look at phosphorylation, which is what it is the process of the digestion of glucose, which is the fundamental component of our food, and we find it's in a hexagonal structure, what happens is the points flip. The phosphorylation is the flipping of the points from glucose to fructose, and fructose is a sugar, and we produce that naturally. So when we have a high sugar diet, we can't phosphorylate that. So it becomes filler, it becomes excess, it becomes baggage, and it causes other problems. And so it doesn't allow this flipping to happen, because the whole purpose of the flipping is to provide the phosphorylation. So we're stopping that. In other words, we're stopping the transmission of energy, and we're stopping the transition of energy from the brain to the body, and the transmutation from the soul to the physicality. And so when you look at the flipping, we say there's a flipping at the points, there's a flipping of the hexagonal formation, and then there's also twisting at the waist. So where you have the connection, the nearness and proximity may be far apart, or it may be close together, simply by twisting the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. So now we see there's a different kind of interaction of energy and motion, and we say it's a two-way street. So the two-way street is for the self-containment of the self-serving, self-binding format, but there's also the interaction with another form. And the reason for that is because we have one Earth that's rotating in its physicality, but we have the hemispheric rotation of the plasma fields, and they oppose each other. So there are 2 hemispheric rotations and 1 physical rotation. So when we're trying to graph these things in physicality, and we see, there's an up and there's a down, there's an up and a down, and it kind of creates a sine wave as things go around. And you have your 3 dimensions because your rotating field is actually spherical, it's not flat, but it keeps moving along. So each point that is moving along is up and down like a sine wave, and these are all overlapping fields. But as they change their position, you on the x-axis are in motion. And you are in a car, and you're the driver in the car, and you start at one point and you go to the other point and you make it there. But things have changed in between. There's a lot of energy in motion. So there's energy exchange, and we say the opposite poles attract. Oh, okay, well, that's good. But if you have energy in motion, then you have to have the fields being connected, and not just at the hip, but there has to be energy that goes across. So there's a repulsion gap at the same time. Remember, it's a two-way street. So there's an attraction point and a repulsion gap connection. So now we can graph a dimension and say, well, it's a two-way street. When one is up, the other one is down, and when the other one's down, the other one's up. And so you have these overlapping fields and these overlapping connections. But, you have to have these opposite poles attracting. So that's what causes the connection. And it's a two-way street. But if you have the poles flipped over, then how do you maintain this connection? Because let's face it, like poles will repel. So this is really going to disrupt the connection. And isn't that what happens when you go to these extremes? So what does that mean? That means the repulsion, two poles, like poles repel, but they don't just fly off. They still stay connected because there's an attraction gap connection. And so that energy connection is a two-way street. So we were saying there's a repulsion connection and an attraction gap connection, or there's an attraction connection and a repulsion gap connection. And it all depends on how the poles are aligned. So now we've resolved that by having the opposite poles all facing together. And so if you follow the green line going from the left to the right, you make it. And if you follow the orange line from the right to the left, you also make it. This is not a sine wave, this is a square wave. And what you see is a nice flow on the x-axis dimension. But in order to facilitate that x-axis dimension, you have to understand there's an exchange of energy in the y-axis dimension and, of course, in the z-axis dimension as well. So the plasma rule is the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, which means when you have these poles coming together is a point of conflict. And so that conflict can be a point of containment also. Well, does it have to be contained, or can there be a deflection? Well, the thing is that when these forces come together, those forces remain. And then when you have this conflict, and even though that may be say a massive energy exchange, there is no bag, there is no containment. And yet the combination of these two forces coming together in what you could call an energy explosion of some sort, whether it's a splash or a bang or a flash, it's contained. So how does that containment become contained at that point? Or it completely disappears. And so you look in the middle of your GANs and you have, well, nothing there. And that nothing is contained within the GANs. Well, what kind of containment is that? So when we look at our dynamic plasma aura, what contains that? And when we see the radiance feeding, what's the containment for that? And then this radiance feedback, well, same question. Where's the containment from that? And so then if we see that the emission is magnetical and the absorption is gravitational, well, then there has to be a pole flipping. And despite the pole flipping, there has to be some kind of containment. And in order to flip, there has to be some kind of energy coming and going. And where's the containment of that? So when we look at the graphing of our souls and we see how, we all come together, we find that we stay within a range. And within that range, as reflected on this graph by amplitude, then we see that within that range is our point of containment. But obviously, there's something that's beyond. And we know that something is beyond because when we look at the agitation of the frequencies and compare that on the left side where we have that flat line at the center point where there is no frequency, where did it go? And what is it contained in? So this all becomes part of our understanding of the transmission spectrum. And, we always say, well, what you see is what you get. Seriously? Well, the beauty is only skin deep, isn't it? Well, so is ugly. And that's why you see sometimes, you ignore the ugly duckling, but they grow up into be a beautiful swan, and you say, my God, here I am working with superficiality on the surface, and I totally miss the internal substance. Because that internal substance reflects the plasma substrate, and the plasma substrate is the foundation for the physicality. So what we see is in the visible spectrum, and that visible spectrum is our point of containment in what we call the here and the now. But obviously, there's stuff that we can't see beyond this point of containment, and it too is contained. So we can't see the container, and we can't see the point of containment, and it's just some nebulous point one step beyond. And this is all part of transmission, because the transmission is the release of that binding energy. It has to precede the retrieval of the beneficial energy. The field release has to precede the field capture. The giving has to precede the taking. The emission has to precede the absorption. So motion cannot exist without a coexistence, because motion is a product of existence. So motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. That state of the plasma dominant point of containment precedes that state of the physical dominant point of containment. And we have to understand, learn, or in many cases, relearn, because we're so dimension centric. And we've come to the conclusion that it's not man-space centric. Forget about that, because we're so unstable, whereas the Earth space is very stable. So, we could say that it's probably Earth space centric, but, then there's the sun, and, we haven't talked much about that, so we can't come to too many conclusions, but each of these fields is contained. And so each containment is dimension centric. And the proximity is dimension centric. And the nature of the pressure is dimension centric. In fact, the surface reactance involves the 3-dimension transmission. But there's a message. What's the message? And how is that message contained? We haven't talked about that. We're just talking about our transmission. And the part of the transmission that we talk about is we're only talking about the feedback transition, things that we can hear, light that we can see, heat that we can feel, or pressure we can feel, the luster, the shine, the superficiality, or the laminar containment. And this is our dominant feedback. We are feedback dominant in our matter plasma dimensions. And that needs to change because we're missing so much. And as such, the KESH Foundation is launching the opportunity for advanced science teams to carry on with the research so that we can bring peace and harmony faster to this planet. Because we are now in the post-March 15, 2024 era of choices. And in that regard, we have no choice. We are in the post-March 15th era. But the choice is to enjoy this bountiful Earth space by understanding the transmutation space of the outer space and the harmony and the graceful space of our inner space. That greater oneness, we're all part of the humanity family. We've been discussing this for 531 Thursdays in a row in the Knowledge Seekers workshops, transcending the limitations of nuclear science. And we've tried so many ways to teach, and they're keep looking for more and better and more effective ways. This is the KESH Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science. Welcome all you beautiful knowledge seekers. It really is time to get back on track. There's a world peace treaty. We have to sign it. We have to sign it with our soul, sign it with feeling, sign it with sincerity, and sign it with our inner peace. So the question is, man the reactor of a three-dimensional universe? Can man find heaven through the field transmission of vertical motion with the guidance of forward motion and perpendicular rotation, feeling the pressure of the three dimensions of truth? The message manifestation comes from beyond the physical confirmation dimension. That's why plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And I hope you enjoyed this trip, and thank you very much for allowing me to present.
Thank you, Alex, for presenting. Very interesting concepts. Again, causes us to think and relate it to the plasma understanding if we can. I saw Joseph's mic just come open. He may have a question or a comment.
Yes, maybe a quite heavy question. We have seen the amino acids, and you have explained it very deeply. Now, in my understanding, is the body the mirror of the soul. So these amino acid structures are also part of our DNA. Do you know where this connection point is to our RNA?
That's a brilliant question. The RNA is the energy parcel. So you can't hold it. So if you think of the DNA RNA relationship, think of a battery. You know there's energy in the battery, and you can only hold the battery. And so that DNA is the form factor of your RNA. But the RNA is your knowledge, is the knowledge that you had when you were born. So that knowledge then had to be converted into the physical environment so that when you were born, you were able to manifest all of that knowledge together within your physicality. So that's the transition from the RNA to the DNA. Then the DNA is now your fingerprint. And your fingerprint has to interact with the environment. And that environment is our Earth space. And our Earth space, DNA, is manifest from its nearness and proximity to the sun and all the planets in the solar system. And it has manifested in a certain way. So now our physical materialization is dependent on our Earth space. And our Earth space is dependent on the materialization of the solar system space. And so we cannot materialize without that determination having been made. And all we have to do is have that seed point with coming together of the interaction of the fields between the soul and the soul of the physicality. And those are in a plasmatic state, and they carry the knowledge of the RNA. And once they manifest into the physicality, that physicality is carried through the carbon-14 connection into our cellular structure, which is still in a plasmatic state because our amino acid structure comes from the DNA. So there's a sequence. So the sequence is the energy from the universe as it travels through and becomes embodied within our excuse me, our RNA, and then is converted to the DNA. So the DNA is the gravitational aspect of the energy exchange between the RNA, which is magnetical. So if you look at the RNA, DNA as a maggrav condition, and of course it's non-visible. So how does the mRNA play into this? Well, because the mRNA is a reflection of the interaction of the environment with the course of your life. And so that feeds back to your DNA, and your DNA then has to adjust to your environment. So today it's cold, so you have to, shall we say, raise your body temperature, or today is hot. Well, you need to be able to cool down, and you can do this naturally. Many people prefer to do it with an air conditioner or with a heater. But as we know with the plasma science, that we can create an environment within our domicile, whether it be the home or a dome of some sort, and we can regulate the temperature. But the temperature is not the temperature of the atmosphere. The temperature is our comfort, our self-serving, energy binding comfort. And that energy binding becomes a product of the interaction of the energies, the magnetical and gravitational plasma forces within our domicile. So that plasmatic energy then likewise has to be converted to its physical dimension so that our physical dimension can interact with that physical dimension. And then we get another feedback that says, yes, you've done the job. So that's working. Another example, if I may, and it's a very important example because we all injure ourselves. So when you cut yourself, the feedback comes back. You've damaged yourself. The cells have to now begin turning on and creating more than what they had because there's a removal. So as soon as you remove that, it creates a high negative charge. And so all this energy is coming and it's painful. And as soon as that polarity flips over, then the pain goes away. But why would it flip over? Because now you've restored back to the continuation of the aura around your body, which is highly negative. So you're not concentrating on that wound, you're now concentrating on the whole. And at that point, the healing stops. The failure of healing to stop, in other words, the failure of the stopping of the creation of cells is called cancer. And so this is done through the disruption of the transmission dimensions of our physicality. And so if we are sending false signals back through our mRNA, which is in the physical state, and communicating that with the DNA, then the DNA will send that signal back up to the RNA, and there will be an adjustment. There will be an adjustment in the interaction of the energy fields between your soul and your physicality and the soul of the earth and the earth's physicality. So in order for us to work within this harmony, we need to stop being physically dominant and connect with the plasma soul, the dome of peace on this planet, because the planet is inherently peaceful. So we're the ones with the problem, and because we're physically dominant. If we were plasma dominant, then we would simply align ourselves with our soul, which is already aligning with the planet. And you know that because you were born. You wouldn't be born on Earth if you weren't aligned. You'd be born on Mars or Jupiter or Saturn or somewhere. So, you know, you came here willingly. That's the whole point. And if you came here willingly, then you came for a purpose. And that purpose is ingrained in your RNA. So now, if we disconnect our RNA and say, oh, you know, we don't know what that is, we're just going to dissect the DNA. Well, the DNA is the same in each and every cell in your body. So if you have a left thumb and you have a right thumb and you have the same DNA, then the DNA is not the difference. You know, if you have a left lung and a right lung and the DNA is the same, DNA is not the difference. The DNA is the same in each and every cell. So, and the knowledge that the RNA delivers is the same in each and every cell. Because how can the kidney differentiate from the pancreas? And why would the kidney create a phospholipid layer around it so that they can differentiate between oil and water? Because when it provides that plasmatic energy to produce the oil, it also produces the water at the same time. But that water is not the physical water that we have in our streams. That is the plasma water that we create in the cups of life. That is the plasma water that we create when we produce the GANs. That is the plasma water that is with the amino acid in a plasmatic state floating on the top of the water. And you know it's plasmatic because oil and water do not mix. And if you take that amino acid off the top of the cup and you dip it in another bottle of water, say physical water that you brought out of the tap, you'll see that amino acid will disperse completely through that cup. And in the process of dispersing, you now have a field interaction, which is now transferring from the higher energy, which is encapsulated within the amino acid, and transferred to the lower energy of the physical water. And so you elevate the strength of that water from its physical condition into a plasmatic condition. And then when you drink that water and you have the amino acid connection, now you create a seed. And your RNA, because it's of a higher energy strength, connects directly to that. And now you have that rock solid, 100% perfect blueprint of your soul. This is such an important thing to understand. And it was released on the YouTube when they tried to figure out how does protein get manufactured, because they couldn't make the connection between the amino acid and the protein, because the protein has to bend, it has to fold over. Where is that energy coming from? It comes from the energy pack we call RNA. And it will, because it has that, your blueprint, it will adjust its communication transmission based on what you want to do. So you want to make protein of a liver, you want to make protein of the heart, or you want to make protein of the skin. The RNA knows that because each one has this fingerprint, which we call a spectrum, a plasmatic spectrum. Thank you, Joseph. Beautiful question.
Thank you, Alex. One thing, could you be so kind and show the picture of the amino acids again?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Then I will have a try where to find the RNA.
Oh, okay, well, let's see if I know then what you're talking about. Okay, so what I talked about, well, are you talking about
No, where you have the pentagonal and hexagonal.
oh,
This one,
okay,
please.
got it. Right, bingo.
Okay, coming from the viewpoint that our soul is in the center of our brain and is the gravitational center of our whole body. And
Right,
every cell has also a gravitational center and is connected to this higher level energy. So in my theory at the moment, and my knowledge is weak like the knowledge of anybody else, you have every atom has this gravitational center in the middle.
right.
It's it's not that easy to draw with this trackball I have. And together we have here also a gravitational center. And then we have here in this structure also a gravitational center, but somehow the center will be somewhere else because there are two centers and each building block has a center. And all together, because they have this connection in this structure, they will have this, I will draw it in a different color. Let's take this one. So for example, maybe this point will be here. And we have this double helix structure. Just imagine it, please. I won't draw it at the moment. But we have many of these amino acids together in this, well, I try somehow to, let's make it this way, because there we have the bridges in there.
Correct.
And I think this RNA structure is in these structures, like the soul is in our brain. Like in the center of every cell, we have also a little soul, let's call it. And maybe we can find, but it's just theory at the moment. I just wanted to share it. Maybe we can.
Oh, it's not theory. It's not theory. No.
Okay.
No, you're 100% correct. If you have the red dot in the center of the hexagonal structure of the adenine, you have the red dot in the pentagonal structure of the adenine. That's the soul. That soul is a coexistence of the soul of the body. Let me put it to you another way. Joseph, have you ever had an idea?
Many of them, but not always the best ones.
Oh, I wasn't making a comment. I was just asking you if you had an idea. So that idea is a part of you. It's a coexistence because you created it. But in the process of creating that idea, you didn't cut yourself, did you? And you know, I used to joke with my wife, you know, because when she came up with an idea, I'd always ask her, did it hurt? You have an idea, the idea, the creation of the idea doesn't hurt. The hurt comes when you try and share that idea with someone else and they say, oh, you know, that's a stupid idea. That's when it hurts. But the creation of the idea itself doesn't hurt because the idea is a coexistence of yourself. So how will that idea, shall we say, grow? So you have to test that idea. So like you say, oh, well, there's a theory. Okay, so you call it a theory. Well, you only have to disprove a theory once that to convert that theory to the trash bin, okay? Because things have to be perfect, they have to work. And this is the thing about the plasma science. It is no longer a theory because the theory has been put in practice. And so we predict an outcome because we had an idea. And that outcome manifests itself in physicality, which meant it was a good idea. It was a correct thinking. And so this is the whole point. We have to have correct thinking. And, you know, for some people, when they do this kind of thinking, they don't actually want to come up with the answer because the process of thinking gives them a position and they like that position. But as soon as the thinking is finished and it manifests into something, well, guess what? You don't have to do the thinking anymore. It's already done. It's finished. And when it's finished, then you move on. That's all part of the growing. But we don't want to leave. We're so happy within our containment. Okay, I'm a professor. I'm a scientist. I'm a bus driver. You know, I'm an engineer. You want to maintain that because it gives you a position within the society. Well, being an engineer is not part of your RNA. Being an engineer is a manifestation of your nearness and proximity within the earth. So, you know, maybe today you're an engineer, tomorrow you'll be a farmer. You know, I grew up in the city and, you know, you talk about stupid. You know, you have no idea, you know, how the food gets to your table. And, you know, I used to be fascinated when I went to the country because I would go to the farmer's market and I would see the farmers bringing their food. And then this is the food that I would buy in the grocery store when the truck would deliver it. And here the farmer was delivering it. And then the farmer was growing the food. And how did he grow the food? So this was all the knowledge that was coming and everybody had an idea. But the fundamental idea that was when I was taught this and how I was taught this was because the systems that I grew up with failed me. It failed me. I was given 6 months to live when I was 35 years old. My health had failed so badly. And, you know, I don't care. You know, if they said today that I had 6 months to live, I'd feel just as, you know, betrayed and shortchanged. Okay, because I'm, from my viewpoint, we're in heaven, and heaven is on earth, and we haven't had an opportunity to fully enjoy it the way literally we're entitled to enjoy it. So the thing is that it changes your life, it changes your perspective. I talked to a person just yesterday. They have a toy car collection, you know, those model cars, and it's quite valuable. And he doesn't want to part with it, but he is dying. So he actually values the car collection more than he does his health. And this is the kind of thing that we've done. We've substituted our physical dominance for our plasma dominance, which is the substructure of our physical manifestation. So that physical manifestation comes as an idea of our soul. and it's embedded within the soul structure within each structure. So as you've drawn in the adenine, you've got a soul in the hexagonal format and a soul in the pentagonal format. But Joseph, where you've drawn the green dot, there is another form that's in there. And that green dot is surrounded by, let's start on the left, nitrogen, calcium, another nitrogen, and it continues straight up into another hydrogen. There's a field in there. There's a field in there determined by the nearness and proximity of all those elements. And if that pole flips, that field goes on the other side. And on the other side of the pentagonal format is another hydrogen. Well, that changes the picture, doesn't it?
What if the field changes all the time and this holds the structure together?
Exactly, it does. It does. Look at the connection between the pentagonal format and the hexagonal format. Two carbons. Okay, that is the hinge. That is a rotational hinge, so that both the pentagonal and the hexagonal format can rotate. But let's be clear. If the hexagonal format is stationary and the pentagon rotates, there will be a difference in nearness and proximity. If the pentagonal format is stationary and the hexagonal flips, the nearness and proximity will change. So in our stable complex state, the endpoints of the hexagonal point, all the poles flip. And so when you look at the structure of the hexagonal form, you have a double bond in the top right-hand corner of the hexagonal, carbon, nitrogen. You have another double bond at the bottom, carbon, nitrogen. And then the link between the hexagonal format and the pentagonal format, you have a double bond, but it's carbon. So that one is magnetical as compared to the carbon-nitrogen bond of the other two. So therefore, it is demanding feeding. So if the sugar feeds an extra hydrogen, right, because the higher strength feeds the weaker strength, then the sugar is now missing a hydrogen. Well, where does that come from? So it has to flip over and say, here, I delivered, I give to you, and I flip over and I take. Once I receive, I flip over and I give. And then I flip over and I take. And that giving and the taking is the constant pole flipping. So when you're looking at these diagrams, you have to understand that everything is in constant motion. And it's not just the whole, it's the points as well. And even if you look at that in the going back to the adenine thing, you have another carbon nitrogen bond, a single bond. That is a twirling point because you have two hydrogens that are at the top. So they have to move. And if you give one of those hydrogens, because they're magnetical, if you give it, then it has to be replaced. So, now that it's gone, you've changed the nearness and proximity relationship, and it has to flip over. And once it flips over, then the other has to flip over to give. So when the hydrogen that's on the left-hand side, the way far in the left-hand side, how does it navigate all the way point by point by point and gets back to the right-hand side? Then you understand that things have to flip constantly. And this is what we're missing. So when we look at what is the difference between someone in health, you find that they're slightly alkaline. Why? Because that involves the presence of oxygen. What happens if they're in poor health? They're slightly acidic. That means they are deprived of oxygen. If you look at the adenine, the sugar molecule there, there's no oxygen. If you look at the thymine and you look at the cytosine, even the guanine, there's oxygen. So the oxygen is fundamental in its magnetical plasmatic state for the gravitational anchorage on this planet. And oxygen always comes in pairs. And you can see that you have a double bond on the oxygen. So, you know, when you have CO2, that's one carbon bonding with two oxygens. And why is the carbon bonding? Because it's lost two hydrogens. So it has to bond to the oxygen and you form a CO2, but that CO2 is in a plasmatic state. And now we know that there's a difference. CO2 in a plasmatic state is life-giving. CO2 in the physical state will asphyxiate you because the creation of the CO2 in the physical state is robbing the oxygen. The carbon has to take in the oxygen. If you burn a piece of wood, it turns black. That's the carbon that's black. And in order to convert to that, it's consuming oxygen. So there's a consumption, so there's a deprivation of oxygen. Whereas when the interaction of the energy coming from the sun interacting with the surface of the magnetosphere of the Earth, it creates hydrogen and ozone, O3. So if that one oxygen, that third oxygen, you know, the two's company, three's a crowd, that third oxygen combines with the hydrogen, boom, you've got water. If you consume two hydrogens out of that third oxygen, boom, you've got carbon. Now that carbon stays connected so that O3 becomes CO2. So the difference between O3 and CO2 is the two hydrogens. But when we're talking about this science and how it's done, then we clearly have to see that there's definitely a different kind of interaction in the upper atmosphere where the energy coming from the sun interacts with the magnetosphere of the Earth. And there's a difference in the energy at the surface level where the surface of the bodies of water, like lakes and oceans and rivers, come in contact with the land. So the Earth's crust is silicon based and the amino acid is organic, it's carbon based. So when we look at the periodic table of elements, we find that what is the difference between carbon and silicon? Ooh, silicon 14. I hope that helps, Joseph.
Let's put it that way. It's much to process. So it helps very much, but it needs some time to digest. Thank you.
I've got 30 years on you. I learned this in 1991, and that's the problem. So when I learned this, and I couldn't do anything with it, and then when I joined the Kesh Foundation, And, you know, people say, well, how do you know that Mr. Cash knows what he's talking about? Because he understands these principles that we've just talked about, but he's gone beyond. He's so far down the road, I can't even see him. I can't even see the you know, the smoke from him going down the road. He's so far ahead. But that's a good thing, okay? Because there's a connection. As long as we understand what we're doing and we maintain that connection, it's easy to follow. We don't have to see him. So even when you connect on the soul transmutation training sessions on Fridays, you can't see the reactors. You know, you're connected with the headphones. And if you're like me, you probably had your eyes closed. So, you know, you're not working on the visible spectrum. You're working on the plasmatic soul spectrum. And that's connected. The Earth is working on that same spectrum. So that's the difference. And this is why I keep saying, you know, we are plasma dominant, but the way we conduct our society is physical dominant. We're trying to tell the soul to shut up. And the soul is saying, hey, wait a second, you know, I'm responsible for 70 trillion cells in your body. And you there, you know, you're telling me that you don't like the job that I'm doing. So, you know, we're out of line. So we have to understand that the process of creation always involves a coexistence, not a consumption.
We should be able to reach this level with the humbleness. I had moments in life where my physicality wanted something or wanted to do something, and it came extremely something different. The soul was dictating because the need of the soul is pretty much higher order than the physicality. And the soul knows much more and has much more overview and connections out there. And
So you need
so
to respect that.
you're only serving your soul. Even when you think you're doing different, it's impossible not to serve your soul. And with the humbleness, it should be possible to open the door.
It is possible to ignore your soul, because your soul will never kill. So the only way that, you know, a human being can do that is, you know, like when we were children and, you know, our parents say, oh, don't do that or don't go there. And you say, yes, mother, I hear you. And then, you know, you're around the block and around the corner, and then you say, oh, mom, you know, go back into the kitchen and, you know, let me be me, you know, and you get yourself in trouble. So if you're not listening to your soul will always guide you. Your soul is your best friend, because that's you. And if you're not your best friend, you've got problems. And we indeed do have problems, because exactly like what you've said, you said it so beautifully. So I don't want to repeat that. You've done a terrific job, and I really thank you for bringing this subject up. I've really wanted to talk about it in this kind of detail for a long time. So I thank you very much.
Thank you too. It was a great input.
You'll find that there's consistency. Okay, that's very important. If there's no, if you find that, you know, you come to the edge of the flat earth, you're down the wrong road.
Claudia's just raised her hand. Go right ahead. You don't need to raise your hand. We have microphones. Just come in. Thank you.
I only want to add something that I was listening, and I want to ask Alex too about this knowledge. Because in medicine we study that the difference between DNA and RNA, it's only one amino acid. that the difference is guanine is in our DNA, and we change to uracil in our RNA. And I was seeing in the YouTube, Google now, the difference between them, and the difference is only one carbon, one hydrogen, 3 nitrogen, and 1 oxygen. So it's 5 amino acids.
Yes.
And in Google, it says that it's called formyazil, I don't know the name. And I don't know why 5, the difference, because this difference I think is so important, because it's the difference between our physicality and our soul. This change, this connection. And I don't know what to do with it, with this knowledge, with this difference, with this amino acid.
That's another.
Only this.
Yes. Claudia, finish, please.
Alex, sorry. Yes.
No, I didn't hear your last sentence. Could you repeat, please?
No, I don't know what to do, because this knowledge came to me now when you were talking with Joseph, and I saw, and in Google came to my mind to see the difference between the uracil and the guanine, the difference between RNA and DNA, because the other amino acids is the same. So this difference between our DNA and RNA is only 5 amino acids. 1 carbon, 1 hydrogen, 3 nitrogen, and 1 oxygen. And it's not 6 for me, it was like 6, because Mr. Cash talked so much with carbon, that the carbon feed our soul, and I don't know why it's 5. If you,
Well, the
it's
reason
only
it's
that. Thank you.
that's another great question. The reason it's 5 is because the DNA, the chromosome, the helical coil is in combination, in pairs. And so we have a variety. We have trillions of differences, and each cell is different because of the location of each cell is different. You can't have one cell in 2 different locations, right? That it would be a neighboring cell. It's always a different cell. So you have to have this, but it goes to a very important point to do with calcium, because there's a relationship. So for instance, you have sodium chloride and you have a sodium potassium relationship. You have a phosphorus sulfur relationship. Well, you have a calcium magnesium relationship. And the calcium is, generally speaking, in physicality, non-soluble. That means it's hydrophobic. Within the cell structure, calcium is present in each and every cell and is fundamental. But some of the calcium is liquid, some is solid, like bones, some is flexible, like the cartilage in your nose or the cartilage in your ears, and some calcium is actually food, like for your brain. So the calcium itself has multiple personalities, and it's been extremely difficult for us to recreate this in the physicality because of these properties. The only thing we seem to be able to create in the calcium is, well, actually, it's, where is it? It's here. Morellinate. And this is very important because it's very alkaline. So calcium by nature is alkaline. So, one of the products we produce in the cup of life is calcium carbonate. But that calcium is soluble. So if you were to go to a construction store, hardware store or something and buy some calcium carbonate, you'd find that it would be settled to the bottom like a clay. And, if you were to stir it up, that calcium would be in suspension. And then if you let it sit, it would settle to the bottom again. So it isn't soluble. And that's the whole problem. But, when you take the calcium and you mix it with silicon, aluminum, and oxygen, you create cement. And cement is a silicate product. It is a hydrated aluminum silicate, and it's made from the Earth's crust. The Earth's crust is made from that. And it's because of this hydration of the interaction of the calcium, aluminum, and silicate consumes oxygen. It consumes oxygen. That's why it is part of the Earth's crust. Whereas when we have that within us as a gas, it exchanges oxygen. So this is a different personality. So you have to have a change that facilitates that change in personality. So the amino acid structure and the link in the helical coil of the DNA is in pairs. And sometimes it's guanine and sometimes it's uracil. And it all depends on, what it is. So that you have a physicality above the neck and a physicality below the neck. And it's different. And it's different because the blood circulation in the body is inside the body, whereas the blood circulation around the head is around the outside. So, no one in the conventional science, was prepared to acknowledge that difference or account for that difference, and it really affects you, when you have to understand that the iron that's in the blood anchors you to the earth. So when we go to sleep and we go from a vertical position to a horizontal position, and we allow the soul to go, we're looking through a transformation where instead of the body encapsulating the soul encapsulates the body. But something happens in that process. There's a giving and taking of energy. So there's a giving and taking of creation. There's a giving and taking of decay. And so which is it? Is it decay? Is it creation? Or is it being a catalyst? So you yourself are a catalyst because you were born, you were a child, and you grew up to be an adult. So you were maintaining your gravitational stability and the necessary energy binding that came together. And, you drew your energy from whatever you needed. So now we understand that 80% comes from the universe. Well, this is good. So, we are already, most of the job is done. We just have to finish off that final 20%. But we find that last 20% is so disruptive and it's so dominant that it's occupying our focal point. And so if we can shift our focal point to understanding how we create, and as Joseph just said, something came to my mind, and it manifested differently from what I thought. No, what came to your mind was correct. Your interpretation of what came to your mind was flawed somehow. So life is for learning. So now you say, okay, what is it that's different? And so, you've got to take the square peg and put it in the square hole, and the round peg, put it in the round hole. You have to sort it out. So how does this affect us in our life? Well, it changes our priorities. So, when I had cancer in my family, it came down to Christmas or paying for operation that's supposed to help with the cancer. Well, Christmas lost. Christmas lost. And if Christmas lost in that case, then, Christmas was a very important time in my family. Well, my family was more important. What's the sense in having Christmas if you don't have the family? So the family was more important. So Christmas lost. And if I lost Christmas, I might as well lose Easter, so I apologize. That's my own personal. So no offense to anybody. Everybody has, their own opinion. But the thing is that when we got rid of the cancer, then I had to learn about life. And I said, I don't want to learn about life. I just want to learn how to get rid of cancer. Well, in order to get rid of cancer, you have to understand, about life. You have to understand about RNA and DNA. And well, I don't want all that stuff. That's not going to help me. I was working with computers and doing accounting and stuff like that. RNA, DNA, who cares? Well, then I found out what the difference was. So then how does that incorporate with the society? Well, if you find out that, okay, look, as a man, I look at love differently from that of a woman. And now when I look at love, I look at it differently from when I was young. And I'm glad. Okay, because now I understand what the meaning of it is. And as Mark brought it up earlier on, this is, what is the love? The love is the energy of the universe. That's what it is. It's non-tangible, and the love is the connection. And so, how does that work? Well, you have to recognize it, and it's not something that you trade off for money. It's not something that you weaponize. It's not something that you lord over someone or control them. No, love is eternal. Love is, uh, it's a universal connection. How does it work? Well, who can you talk to about this subject? Who in your circle of friends can you talk to about this? I think from what I know about your circle of friends, you're very lucky. You have more people who you can speak to than I do. So we all run the risk. And when we talk to someone about this, they all look at us like we're crazy. Well, okay, well, it's not important. Why isn't that important? What's more important than understanding about life? I'd like to know what is more important than that. Why is it, why is it all right that any kind of pain and suffering and hardship exists on this planet? Why is that tolerated? Who is tolerating this, and why is that done? And so when you find that if something is always something as opposed to being something else, so you say, oh well, I want this, really, and so you shall have it. And then you say, well, after 40 years, I still want this. Well, what have you been doing for 40 years? Well, for 40 years, I did it your way. And at the age of 40, I did it another way. And so what I struggled with for 8 years was gone in 3 weeks. And then Mr. Kesh makes a claim, oh, you know, we can do this in a week or so. I believe him. Why? Because I've been there, done that. And, you know, I had to work hard to learn. And I've always thought, well, what's the point of learning that? I learned that 30 years ago. What's the point? The point is today in 2024, I'm here and able to talk to you about this. And it's not that, you know, I don't have access to the advanced technology, and I don't have access to the research and development. So, you know, I'm groping in the dark just like you are, except that, you know, I have a basis of knowledge that is consistent, and it's not theory, it's been proven. And the fact that conventional science or conventional education system doesn't want to recognize it, that's not my problem. Okay, because I don't have to pay for, you know, those kind of treatments anymore. I paid enough. So, you know, and then I'm not bragging that I was able to pay. That's not the point. The point is I was forced. Anytime you're forced to do something against your will, that's a form of terrorism. So freedom and emancipation of humanity on this planet is what the Keshe Foundation is all about. And it didn't take me long to figure it out. All I had to do was listen to the basic science, and he put a theory together which was absolutely in line with proper nuclear theory. And I made a decision within a couple of minutes, and that's been since 2015. Never, ever has it failed. And it only has to fail once to be proven that a theory is flawed. It's never been proven. Only the opposite has been proven. And in the absence of having that technology, this world would really, really be a depressing place. And this is why I bemoan, you know, Canadians, you know, for that. And you look at the Telegram channel, we don't even have 100 people, and half of those people are foreigners. When you look at the Brazilian channel, and you know, I see these beautiful get-togethers, 40 people coming into someone's home, and you know, making cups of life and Gans. What planet are you on? It's unheard of, you know. 40 people coming together and having fun making Gans. You got to be kidding. It's amazing. But you know what? That's the difference between your society and the society I've grown up in, and it's very frustrating. But we will change that because we're all connected to the Peace Stone. So it sounds like maybe I didn't answer your question, but what you have to understand is that there's a variety of conditions within the body. And so these structures that we're finding accounts for that variety. Not understanding how it works doesn't account for anything. Accepting that it does work is the first clue. Then to try and figure it out, you know, you put forward a whole bunch of theories, and then you come up and you say, oh, well, wait a second. How come the I Ching has 64 codons, and how come the DNA has 64 codons? Stupid Chinese. They knew this 2,000 years ago, and they codified it. They put it in books. We have a lot of nerve calling them like that. So they knew this. They knew it 10,000 years ago. They knew this. This is the universal knowledge. It's just like Mr. Kesh said, you know, we're just learning the universal knowledge. That's the difference. We didn't discover anything. We didn't invent anything. We're just understanding the purpose of us being here. But the difficult thing is to understand how it works in such a way that you can explain it to somebody else. And it's only because everybody on this panel is allowing me to talk and explain this in this kind of detail that, you know, we can achieve a certain kind of understanding. And then that becomes your foundation. And then you interpret it however it's comfortable for you. But this isn't theory. This
Thank
is
you,
fact.
Alex.
Thank you. Thank you
So
so much.
beautiful, so beautiful what you said. Thank you. Thank you, Joseph, for your question too.
Well, Mark, you can clearly see that, you know, powerful questions like Joseph and Claudia brought up, you know, means we're really working hard to understand this much better.
Appreciate that. And Ike, would you like to try a final question from Ike?
Sure. Yeah. Ike.
I see DLB is back with us. He may have something, Dean Lloyd. But Ike asks, is the x-axis, y-axis, and z-axis representation same as a plasma, principle, transition, and matter?
Yes.
Okay, that was a quick answer.
Had to offset the long answers I had before. No, Ike is really tuning into this.
Okay. Anyone else? I see Selena is here.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, dear.
Thank you, Alex. Your teaching was very, very nice, very good. Mark, you went to the China, right? What is your in there?
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I'd go back in no time. No time at all. Yeah, yeah. Very interesting. Didn't have a long time to explore the culture or anything. I mean, you have a 20,000 year continuous culture there, but very nice, very friendly, very safe.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Did you get to go to the beach at all, Mark?
Oh yeah. Well, the pool. I was at the pool a couple days, and the sun is pretty strong. You really need to be in the shade unless you're already tanned up. I got a little bit of a burn, but not much. It's almost directly overhead. It's sort of like Hawaii, quite a strong sun. Even though it's the same sun, I guess it's the angle of inclination that it hits. Any other thoughts or questions anyone wants to raise?
I want to say something a little bit about the knowledge. We try to study books and understand knowledge. We think we gather knowledge, but from my experience, I understand knowledge is all knowledge is there with us, and we need to go inside ourselves to get that knowledge, not from the outside, from books and other places, because the knowledge was here before, and that's why Chinese people a lot of stuff know before, because who get the knowledge, who keep the knowledge, it is with them, but we don't believe ourselves, we don't believe our soul. That's why we try to find here and there. At the end, when we come back home to inside ourselves, then we will get the knowledge. You know, everybody, we feel that, but we don't try to find that. I think so. We need to find that in ourselves, not outside ourselves. That's it. Thank
Or
you.
increase the vibration or the energy level of the amino acids. That seems to have some sort of effect on increasing knowledge that's already there. You're sort of finding what you missed, perhaps.
Yes, yes.
And that C14 has a way of putting more energy into the amino acid, if I'm understanding it correctly, which allows for a higher level of intellect, intelligence, or knowledge that Mr. Kesh said, with operating in that dimension of energy, there's a lot of knowledge that we didn't even have a clue about. But like you said, he's also said it's all within us. Your RNA carries the creation of the entire universe within it. So it's there. It's a matter of tapping into it. Probably through higher energy sources.
Yes, we need to open ourselves. Like nano coating, if we open ourselves, everything, like relax the body and open the heart and everything, the knowledge will be there. We'll gather the knowledge in ourselves. Everything inside us, not outside. But we don't believe ourselves. That is the main part.
Yeah, that's what I wonder about this universal community floating around and traveling around for millions of billions of years have not hit on it. They're still traveling in the craft. So it is there, the knowledge is there, but sometimes unless it's gifted to you or pointed out very clearly, you won't find it. It doesn't seem like it's that easy to come across and understand it in the universe. He said they're scratching their heads wondering how they missed it, even though, as you say, it was there all the time.
Do you want me to say about my spaceship experience?
Why not?
Why not? Okay.
If you're happy
So
to share, then fine.
no, I share in the Dick show, right? It was there. So a lot of us wasn't there, right? So maybe we can hear and understand a little bit more. So I think so 4 years ago, I will say the first time experience and then second time. 4 years ago, I think so almost, in your show, I told about my first experience. That was, it was my old house, and the house was like 2,000 square feet. 2,000, yes, 2,000 square feet. And then the experience happened. I used to take my daughter to the bus station, and she goes to the downtown in university. So after that, she take the bus. So I used to drive her to the bus station. And then that morning, I woke up before her. I have to go early, so that was it's still dark. That was that time. So I woke early, and then I get ready, and I call her to get ready. So she went to the restroom and getting ready. So I have time. So I went to the bed, the second floor, went to the bed and laying down and watching the fan is on. So I'm looking at the fan, and suddenly I felt I am not. I'm inside something, and it is like a spaceship. My house is 2,000 square feet, but it felt like two sides of the spaceship is bigger than my house, and I'm trying to lift it up, And I'm seeing outside is very bright, it's like noon, but it was dark that time still. And then I felt I'm levitating, and then my body was almost touching the fan. It felt like that. And then suddenly I thought, oh my God, my body now is going to be touch the fan. And then when I thought that, and then one side of my spaceship is rubbing the ground, which side is the restroom of my daughter's bathroom, which side. So that side is rubbing. It is the backyard side, the cement. So again, and try lift it up, and then again rub, like 3-4 times it's happened. And suddenly I lift it up, and then my other side of the spaceship, I saw my spaceship is front side is like Florida side, and back side is New York side. South and north. North is the back. And then other side is somebody is coming, one man. I know that time I didn't tell, because it felt like maybe somebody will say I'm crazy or something. That's why a lot of things I don't share. So now I get little bit confidence, I can say. The other side of my spaceship, with another spaceship coming, that was riding one man, and then he just when he saw I am lifted up, and he slowed his one, and then he saw me and laughed, and then he go back, but he is going in like in north, New York side. So that happened, and then my daughter get ready, and she's calling me, and then I came up, and she's saying, "Oh, mom, I have big tub in my backyard. There is a plant, big fruit tree, and then plant." So she's saying, "Oh, somebody moving your tub, ma. I heard noise." So that was dark time, and we have a friend. Nobody will be there, you know. So I tell her I was laughing. Oh, your mom, spaceship was rubbing the cement. That's why you heard the noise. So she thought I'm just kidding, joking. Actually, I'm joking. Still, I don't know how she heard. It is my experience how she heard the noise. That is still I'm confused. So this was my first experience. It's 4 years ago. And a few months ago, the second experience, it was really different. My uncle was died in New Jersey a few months ago. So he was suffering a long time. So I have a soul touch with him, and I always feel his emotion. Used to. So when he is died, he was sick very long time, and he had a lot of family problems too. So I used to whatever we have touch really really good heart to heart touch. So when he dies, so that day I was after his funeral and everything, I was in my new house now, that time Georgia. So I'm thinking about him. I'm felt very sad about him, and a little bit relaxed too. You know, he feel a lot. He suffered a lot. So I felt maybe his physical body will now will be good and release everything. And then I used to feel sad when I thought about him. Maybe I'm not gonna see physically him. That time I was thinking about that. So I went bed early that day, like 6-7 o'clock, and then I fall asleep. And then my husband came from work, and whatever it happened, I don't know. I was asleep, and then he went to bed, and then like 1:15, I woke up in the middle of the night. So when I woke up, I didn't do anything. Just I sat down. I took the pillow, from my head and put it in the back side. And then I sat in meditation in my bed. And then my husband woke up and he went to the bathroom and then come back. I hear every noise. I saw a few times I opened my eyes and then closed. And my side wall of bed, there was big window, very big window, like almost a whole wall. And suddenly I felt in my room, there is two kinds of field. The other one side of the field, whole room, is a little bit thicker, darker, a little bit darker, not darker, is there is a light, dim light. But other side is very lighter. There is no thickness. And then there was dark, but it is clear. I can explain the field. It was two type of field, and I'm seeing from my body to my side of the bed to the window is some kinds of field opening, and then it's like a Asian gourd. The vegetable big one is like big size is my side. It's look like the field is that shape, and then it went outside, and suddenly I felt I'm in outside. I'm in space, and I'm seeing the lot of star and everything, and the spaceship felt like very big. It is very big, like a big football field, and I'm standing in front of the like it's cockpit, you say in the plane, right? The front side. I'm in the front side, and it was like a dome. It was like a dome, glass dome, and I'm seeing everything. Is everything clear, open? And then there was a screen in the front side, and it was black, rectangular, big screen, and there was silvery whitish color is writing is coming from the screen, one side to another. Is one side is coming and another side is going. I'm watching the screen, and I felt I was so peaceful. My whole body is like air. I'm feeling very peaceful, and suddenly I saw my right side. There was a man standing, and it was in front of him. There was a glass table like a stuff, but there is no leg, but something in front of him. But I'm seeing the space is round, so I'm seeing his backside, not front side. But his table is two side I'm seeing, and he is look like an ant, and it was man. It was man, but look like ant, and he was very shiny. and and then I didn't feel anything. Just I felt I am there. It is mine. Everything is mine. And I felt he's helping me. Whatever he's doing there, he's helping me. And when I saw the front screen, and suddenly I looked it up a little bit. My hand, it felt like it's a man hand, and it is skinny, and it is brown, not black. It is brown, darker brown, and it maybe he is tall. And in front of the screen there was geometries coming one side to another. I'm watching that, and that time I understood. I'm driving. I'm navigating the spaceship.
Very nice. We were covering that a little bit earlier about the matter state that the UFOs use.
Yeah.
And we're so enamored with them, we think they're very advanced, but he said they're just operating in the matter state with their craft.
Yeah.
Not
But
much
it felt
different
like
than
it is.
us. Yeah.
It felt like emotion. I think so. It is connected to my brain. I feel like that. It is.
Beautiful.
And then
Beautiful.
the screen is nobody seeing except me. I feel like that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, we all have different experiences, but we're trying to get that energy dimension, which up to now we haven't really interacted, I don't think that much. The dream state, yes. But Mr. Kesh seems to indicate it's emotions and energy. And that's the existence in the universal condition. I don't know if you travel in the matter state, then you'll interact with those beings in the matter state and their craft. If you travel in the dimension of energy, I guess it's more of an energy and an emotion interaction. And this is what the cosmic rays, this C14 and other things are going to help us to understand. And then in that dimension, there's all sorts of knowledge that we can absorb that we had no clue even existed, even though it's always been there, as you say. The knowledge is there. It's just getting into that dimension and absorbing
Another
it.
thing,
Yes.
another thing, Mark, I understand right now there is a layer. There is a layer. The first spaceship, I think so, it is closer to Earth. It works maybe closer. And then the other one, it felt like it is another layer. I think so. We have layer.
Another
lots-
dimension.
Yes.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's
Very
worth doing.
good. Thank you for sharing. I
Thank
know
you.
some people don't feel comfortable in sharing in an open crowd, but with us, I think we're very well accepting of your experience. We're not questioning it and we're not doubting it. We thank you for
Yes.
sharing.
Yes. Thank you.
Can you
Okay.
imagine on some of the craft, some of these ETs are looking down at Earth and saying, we've been here millions of years and here's this human guy on Earth. He figured it out and we didn't. That's another question that could be going
Yeah.
through the universe.
Yeah. They're a little bit envious, Mr. Kesh said, of mankind at this point. But they'll have it too. All the created beings will be able to transit between the two dimensions, as I understand it. So it's a gift from the Creator in a way. To all
Mark,
of the created. Yes. Go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you, on March 21st, it was announced in the China news about the new hydrogen train. Did you see that when you were there?
I did not. I didn't ride on any trains, but yeah, I think I saw a picture that you actually had of it. And this is, again, matter state, hydrogen and so on.
Yeah, but it's not a hydrogen fuel cell.
Okay.
And you don't measure hydrogen in kilowatts. They were able to produce the hydrogen on board,
Mm-hmm.
and then they were converting it to electricity. And the electricity was 5 kilowatts on demand.
Mm-hmm.
Sound familiar?
Yes. Where was the hydrogen coming from? They were cracking water, or were they had a tank of hydrogen?
No, Mark. They were producing it.
Out of the fields.
Yes.
Oh, good. Very nice.
I want to say something in here. More than 18 years, I think so. I was in Utah that time. 3 years I was there. And that time, I used to feel like my body was like a electricity post all the time, everything shocking. If my daughter want to touch me, they feel shock. And I had very powerful electric feelings in my body.
A lot of
And,
static electricity, they call that?
yeah. And if I used to go to sleep, and then if I suddenly move my blanket, there was what is that? Is thunder time is happen,
Mhm.
Those kinds of 4 or 5 places is happening inside my blanket because of the electricity. It happened 3 years. I was feeling, I can't explain it.
Was a shocking
It's like,
experience.
yeah, 3 years it's happened. And after that, my experience is happening. Maybe there is some kinds of relation in the electricity. That's why I want to say something. Maybe we need to increase electricity in our body or something.
I think it's the energy in the amino acids that gets energized by the C14. And that
Maybe.
does a connection, I think, to a different dimension and different knowledges, and perhaps more and more we'll
Yeah.
be experiencing it, I think, as we move along this path of enlightenment. But it's for everyone to choose whether the matter state or the plasma state. But he said at one point you could take part of your trip on a craft and part of your trip in the dimension of energy. So he said a lot of different things, but this is what apparently is coming through in this latest workshop.